Good morning and welcome to the Small Business University. My name is Kelly Leonard. I'm the CEO of Taylor Leonard Corporation and your host for the Small Business University. Joining me this morning is a group of dynamic small business owners and entrepreneurs here in the studio, and we welcome you to the live stream. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our title sponsor, Mid-Atlantic Federal Credit Union's own Mark Walensky.
Thanks, Kelly. I just wanted to welcome everybody on behalf of Mid-Atlantic Federal Credit Union, Montgomery County's only community charter credit union. Welcome to today's Small Business University.
Thank you, Mark. And before we get started, I'd like to just give a quick shout out to Montgomery Community Media. Be aware of the fact that on Wednesday, April 22nd, it's the day in the life. It's also Earth Day. So we invite you, the small business community, to tweet out your pictures. Let us know what's going on inside of your company, inside of your community, so that we can really celebrate all that Montgomery County has to share with its constituents. And with that, I'd like to introduce this morning's guest speaker. Gabrielle Jackson is someone who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. She's the CEO of Millennial Solution, and she's also the author of a wonderful book called The 5 Millennial Myths. And she's here to share with us this morning some strategies to help us to engage millennials not only at work, but also at home. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up Miss Gabrielle Jackson.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And each of us have these moments in our lives where we kind of come of age, right? If you can think back, maybe that moment was you're like, I'm a man, or I'm a woman. That day that you realize that you're an adult. And maybe some of you are still waiting for that day. It'll come. I remember for myself when that day happened, and it was when I uttered these 3 words. Kids these days, right? I remember looking out and realizing I was nothing like the next generation that was coming up. I was like, I would never act that way. I would never say that. I would never wear that, right? Whether or not we realize it or not, we're consistently distancing ourselves from the next generation. This morning, we're going to be talking about the millennial generation, who they are, what motivates them, how to engage them, how to inspire them, and for you small business owners out there, how to retain them to keep them on your team. We're going to be talking about the real practical takeaways that you can begin to take away immediately after following this morning to really begin to engage that next generation of talent and create a more productive and a more fulfilling work environment. So, who are the different generations today? And why should we care? There are 3 and sometimes even 4 different generations at work today. Usually, in years past, people were maybe retiring at 56. Now the average retirement is about 64. The next generation, the millennial generation, is the largest generation on the planet. In the United States alone, there are 80 million of us. So here we are, an incredibly motivated, ambitious, educated generation jumping into the workforce. Then we've got another generation right in the middle, which is the Xer generation. Following that, we have the boomer generation, and still we have the traditionalists as well, and they're all kind of mixed together in this cocktail of workplace environment where naturally each generation has their own workplace preferences, communication styles, relationships to technology. Some have no relationship to technology, right? So this morning we're really going to be delving specifically into the millennial generation. And I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about the different generations at work, I also provide workshops and trainings to be able to come into your company to really be able to utilize who those 3 and often 4 different generations are at work. So who is this millennial generation? Oftentimes I'm asked, I'll be on an airplane or sitting next to someone on the metro, or maybe I'll be standing in line at the airport and someone will be like, so what do you do for a living? Pretty simple. I'm a millennial strategist. In fact, I'm the only millennial strategist in this area who actually helps companies optimize their multi-generational workforce who's actually a millennial. Coming in, being able to help you understand how to motivate my generation to help you really get inside the head of a millennial. People are like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. What's a millennial? So we're going to be talking a little bit about what is a millennial. What does it mean to actually be a millennial? And for those of you who work with millennials, this is even an extra one for those of you who maybe live with millennials or have millennial kids, a little bonus for you parents out there, on how to actually get inside the head of those that you're working with and that next generation coming up. So, what is a millennial? Millennials are those that are born between the years 1981 and the year 2000. Again, we're the largest generation on the planet. We're also the most diverse generation in American history, and we're the most educated generation in American history. We're incredibly ambitious. We have this worldly culture about us that we want to grow and learn and expand. What are our priorities at work? Well, when you look at a millennial, for those of you who have millennials that you work with and you walk by their office and their desk, how many different browsers do they have open? Like no less than 3, right? Because heaven forbid they're not also streaming something and listening to music, and they have an Excel spreadsheet on, and then they've also got email that they're returning as well. For millennials, being able to multitask also means being able to be productive. For those of you who have millennials, one opportunity for you to be able to coach them to be more productive at work is to help them realize focusing one topic at a time. Now, as humans, we literally cannot multitask. I know this is really terrible news for many of you, especially for you moms out there, right? Trying to do multiple things at the same time. Literally, our brains just don't fire fast enough. The synapses just can't handle it. So, helping your millennial, particularly those who might have an addiction to technology, be more productive means focusing on one task at a time. It's great that technology allows us to do multiple things at the same time, but to be effective, we must be focused, we must be efficient. Next, mission. Millennials are incredibly mission-oriented. This might shock you, but we care more about mission than we do about money. 1 out of every 2 millennials in the United States under the age of 30 actually works for a nonprofit. And in fact, 68% of them reported last year that they volunteered for a nonprofit. Millennials care about mission. We don't care as much about making money as we care about making a difference. So when you're looking for millennials, because guess what? They're interviewing you more than you're actually interviewing them, that they want to care about that triple bottom line. They care about people, they care about profit, but they also care about the planet. So make sure when you are connecting with that next generation, whether you're hiring them on to be a part of your team, wanting to retain them, wanting to raise them up to be leaders and be managers, maybe take over your company in a couple of years, remember that they care about personal mission. One opportunity I would challenge you to do is have every individual in your company write out their personal mission statement and talk about how that mission statement actually reflects the mission statement of your company. People care about being connected to the purpose of the organization that they're a part of, no matter their generation. Fulfillment. Well, I still have not yet met someone who's like, I really don't want to be fulfilled at work, right? Like, I really want to sit in traffic for a long time and then get to work and feel really terrible about my day and maybe get in a fight with my coworker, right? I still have not met this person. If you know them, please send them my way, right? Everybody wants to be fulfilled. Everybody wants to know that we're appreciated, that we're seen, that we're a part of something. But millennials, interestingly enough, had this idea of work-life balance introduced to us at a much younger age. I speak at universities across the country, and you would be surprised at how work-life balance is the #1 question that I get when people ask me about what the future of the workforce is going to look like. Mind you, no one has any idea what work-life balance is. They just know that they need it, right? So looking at attracting millennials to come and work for you, you have to realize that they want to be fulfilled and they want to be able to live a life that's work-life integration, where things come together, where there's fluency between their life and their work, and where they're working to live rather than living to work. Communication preferences for millennials. I'm sure this is going to surprise all of you that millennials, in fact, like text messaging. Any of you who have millennial kids have probably had to learn how to text message. It's kind of like learning a foreign language, right? If you go into another country, you're going to want to go and understand their culture and their customs, what they say, what they eat, because you don't want to offend them, right? It's kind of the same thing with millennials. Are millennials from another planet? No. Not really, anyway. But we are a different culture from who you are. So understanding to bridge that gap, take a leadership role in your company and say, I want to build a relationship with you. What's the best way for me to be able to communicate with you? I coach millennials, and I tell them that #1 thing, in order to get respect from those who manage you, ask them a very simple question. Say, what's the best way that I can get a hold of you? I respect your time enough that I want to make sure that I'm effective when I communicate. Is it okay if I text you? If I call you after hours, is that okay? Do you prefer email? Is a phone call the best way to communicate with you? By showing that you want to communicate with someone and be effective in that, it's the first line to building a quality relationship with someone. Now, I often tell people the day that I taught my mother to text is the day that I will constantly regret. She's incredible. She's really fantastic at text messaging. And she used to write me these really long emails, right? And they would just be like a couple paragraphs and then turn into like a small book. And I'd be like, Mom, that's great. Can you just text me? So she was like, okay. So she literally would just take her emails and put it into a text message. And I'd be like scrolling for days, right? And I'm like, so I just pick up the phone and I call her. And she's like, but I'm trying to text message you. You asked me to text message. I'm like, Mom, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's okay, right? So that's just an example of how we've got these different communication preferences, and we really all need to be able to come together to work more efficiently together. Relationships to authority is really interesting when you start studying different generations. Now, in your generation, the concept of respect might be something that's a given, right? You are, therefore, you should be respected. You are the professor. You are the parent. You are the teacher or the coach or the boss. Therefore, you should be respected. Millennials have an inverse relationship with respect. And by that I mean many millennials want to have a relationship with you before we're going to demonstrate that sort of respect. We really expect relationships first and foremost. Many of us have incredible relationships with our parents. And we're starting to see a more informal relationship with our bosses as well start to seep into the workplace. So when you're looking to build a relationship with a millennial, take that first step. I know sometimes it's a little hard, sometimes it's a little frustrating, but show that you respect them and jump over that bridge and then watch how they'll run miles for you. Millennials love feedback. We live in an instant culture, right? Instant likes, instant shares. We can know within seconds if we post something online whether or not it's going to go viral. Well, the same is also true in feedback at work. We want to know, how are we doing? How can we be improving? What should we do next? How can I do better? It's a myth that millennials only want to have positive feedback. Sure, we like hugs and trophies just like everybody else, but we also want to know how we can improve because we want to have that constant challenge. But that makes sense, doesn't it? We're a generation addicted to education. We constantly want to be improving. So provide that sort of education and insight for your employees on the job. When it comes to teamwork, millennials prefer collaboration. We're addicted to being part of a team. We were raised being on soccer teams and speech and debate teams and science fair teams. And even in college, we were constantly reminded the importance of being on a team. For those of you who have millennials, you'll probably give them a task, and within a couple minutes, they're already collaborating with their other friends, or they're on some sort of social media site, learning more from other people because we believe that we are better together. What an incredible opportunity for you as a business owner to tap into that appreciation for teamwork. In my book, I talk about the 5 millennial myths that are out there about this next generation. Why 5? Well, I could probably go to 10 or 15 or 210, but really based off of my study and research, I found that there are really 5 areas that particularly business owners are starting to think and stereotype about this next generation. I wanted to come in as a millennial ambassador to be able to defend and enlighten others about who this next generation is. Because yes, there are challenges with working with this next generation, just like there were challenges working with your generation, and there will be in the future. But to first be educated, then you will be empowered to actually engage millennials as well. So what's that first myth we're going to be talking about? Number 1 myth, and I'm sure you've all been thinking it, is entitled. So the number 1 myth that I get all the time whenever I'm talking to people about who this next generation is. We're the trophy generation, right? We were given a trophy or a plaque for showing up and being cute, because heaven forbid anybody actually keeps score, right? I played competitive tennis for about 15 years, and I can tell you, I just have boxes of these trophies. And I didn't win half of the tournaments that I have these trophies for, and I'll tell you, I recently cleaned everything out, but I only kept 2. And those were the 2 tournaments that I remember, blood, sweat, and tears. I remember the score. I remember, what I was wearing. I remember the experience because I was invested in it. So realizing that millennials are coming from that mentality where everybody's a winner, and so we want to have this sense of inclusiveness when we come into the workforce. We were also the generation that were told we can do anything that we want and we can be anything that we want. Now we're walking into a work world, and heaven forbid, we think we can do anything that we want and we can be anything we want. Who knew that we were actually listening to you guys, right? So this is coming across as entitled to many business owners. And so realizing that, yes, there is entitlement within this generation, it's important to recognize that, recognize the why, the culture that we were raised in. But what I share is, yes, there is entitlement, but we should look at it more as ambition misdirected. Millennials are incredibly ambitious. We're always asking why not. We're wanting to volunteer for things. We're seeing ourselves in positions of leadership at younger ages. We're saying, why do we have to go from A to B to C? Isn't there a faster way? Isn't there a better way? Isn't there a more efficient way? So if you're looking at building a team with millennials on it, tap into that ambition. Understand that entitlement is really almost like this fire. And you want to be able to hone that fire to really be able to fuel the passion and the productivity of your entire workforce. We have here 10 millennial motivators that every company must know. I'd encourage you to write each of these down and begin to incorporate them within your organization to keep in mind who this next generation is and really help them to work best for you. The first is mission. We already talked about it this morning. Millennials are incredibly mission-oriented. We want to know what we do makes a difference. Second, work-life balance. We want to know that where we're working appreciates us and sees that we also have a life in and outside of the office. Third, travel. Millennials are incredibly excited about the opportunity to be able to travel. A simple thing is just realizing that millennials are probably going to start asking more about vacation policy in the interview than maybe some generations have before, right? Because that's a priority for us. We want to have that flexibility. This concept of a gap year is really becoming more standard here in the American culture because millennials are saying, why not take off a year and travel to another country or work for a nonprofit on another continent? Why not take that opportunity to really expand your own horizons? Fourth is flexibility. We want to be able to work from home. We are the first generation that really, this concept of flexible work hours is just native to us. Many of us are going to college and having to take online classes. Many of us are even getting degrees completely online. And because of that, we have this mentality of, I can still work from a place that's not an actual brick and mortar building. So an opportunity for you to be able to engage with millennials is maybe not every millennial should be working from home, right? That's not a perfect fit for everybody. But if that's a priority for one of your young employees, help them create a work environment that's going to work best for them. Help them earn an opportunity to get that flexible work environment rather than having it something that's just understood. Recognition is incredibly important, helping them realize they have a unique contribution to be giving. And that's not necessarily formal recognition, right? If you're a millennial and you're not getting any sort of feedback about how you're doing, I mean, they're starting to hit the road. They're like, thanks, but no thanks. I need to know how I can be improving. Next, empowerment. We don't necessarily want to be told how to do everything, but we want to know that you believe in us, that we're empowered to be able to actually make a difference. Next, security. Now, this might be kind of surprising to you. As a generation, we are known as job hoppers. The average millennial will stay at their job between 2.5 and 3 years. I'll give you something. Here in the DC area, it's about 11 months. The average millennial will leave every 11 months. That's because they're incredibly ambitious, there are a host of opportunities, and it's fairly competitive out there. 65% of millennials actually admitted last year they're actively looking for other places of employment. So I would challenge you, for those business owners out there, the question isn't really if we should be engaging with millennials, it's how quickly can we engage with millennials. Because the reality is it costs about 150% of someone's salary to actually replace them. So begin to engage millennials today. So security is important for millennials because although we're job hopping, we want to know where we work is still going to be there. Which makes sense, right? We're a generation that came of age during an economic recession. We want to know that they're still committed to us. Creativity is incredibly important. We want to be unique. We want to customize our work experience, right? We customize our user experience when we're watching TV. We also want to customize our work experience as well. Leadership opportunities is incredibly important. Give them something to own to be able to grow into. And finally, support. For those of you who might have some millennials that you want to get rid of, I'm going to give you a little bit of an in about how to kind of get them to hit the road. First, micromanage. tell them how to do everything. Maybe like stand over them and breathe heavily, right? Like if they feel like they're being micromanaged, they're not feeling empowered. Giving them no feedback, just, send them out to pasture and just like let them do their own thing. And it's amazing how many millennials I talk to, they're like, my boss doesn't tell me how I'm doing. How can I be improving? They constantly want to be knowing and growing. Next, static job tasks. Do the same thing every single day. And finally, give them an unclear purpose. Right? Millennials are not only called Generation Y because we're the generation after X, we're also called Generation Y because we want to know why. First, start with why, then go into the how and the what. Finally, here are some tools to put in your toolbox to how to actually engage with millennials. Millennials don't necessarily want to be managed as much as we want to be coached and mentored. We want to develop relationships with you as our boss. Look at cross-training and continually educating them. If you bring them in one role, look at doing some job rotation. Give them some other opportunity to be exposed to other parts of your organization. Prepare them early. Onboarding is incredibly important to settle the expectations of your millennials so they know what they're getting into. Give them personalized incentives. Ask them what really motivates them. Would they like more time off? Would they like to be able to come in early and leave later? Can you customize their work experience to their most productive work hours? Finally, give them consistent feedback. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do a 360-degree review every single week or every single quarter, but it looks like creating a culture of feedback where you're consistently giving your employees information about how they can constantly be improving, and also to recognizing them for their unique contributions. It doesn't matter your generation, you want to be recognized for who you are and what you're doing on the job. So just remember to keep that front of mind when engaging the next generation. We're going to transition now into a time of question and answers, but I want to challenge you to start considering when we're looking at this next generation, largest generation on the planet, what are those biggest pain points for you? Is it attracting millennials, trying to get them in the door? Is it retaining them? Do you have millennials but they're leaving every 11 months? Or is it optimizing millennials? You have them there, but you're wanting to further engage, motivate, and take their productivity to the next level. I provided here a free download for each of you to be able to learn a little bit more about what those secrets really are to engaging millennials. You can download it here on my site, millennialsolution.com/free, and continue to look at the resources that I provided for you. I'll take some questions now.
Please come to the mic if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi, Gabrielle. My name's Phil Huang. So you cited a number of 150% of a person's salary to replace them. So that includes the cost of the human resources people to make phone calls and recruit, maybe the services of an outside recruiter, the time for a manager to invest time to train that person, travel costs. What other costs are included in that 150% that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's everything from finding, recruiting, and training that individual, the time that's going to go into an onboarding process and making sure that they're fully equipped to do that job.
Yeah. So I pretty much mentioned everything.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
You are absolutely on it, Phil.
Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you.
What other burning millennial questions do you have? How many of you have millennial kids? A good amount, right? Was this helpful? Do you kind of understand a little bit more? How many of you are going to start tweeting at your kids now? Maybe texting them a little bit more?
Hi, Gabrielle.
Hello.
Jerome Leonard. And my question is, I noticed you didn't talk a lot about conflict management between the generations. How do you view a strategy for that? Give us some tips.
Fantastic question. Thanks so much, Jerome. It's really fascinating. We're starting to study now technology and conflict resolution. So each generation has kind of a preferred way of communicating, right? So for millennials, it's text messaging. For boomers, it's probably going to be more phone or email. Xers usually email. And traditionalists, it's much more in person. Now, what's fascinating with millennials is they're being taught to not confront people head on, right? Because of technology, we have this artificial barrier between us and another person. That's why we're seeing a lot of cyberbullying, is because people are really starting to project out there because there's no fear of backlash and retaliation. It's interesting, an experience happened just about 2 weeks ago with one of my clients where it was a young man and he had a challenge with his manager. And it was something that probably could have taken maybe 2 to 5 minutes on the phone to resolve. It was just a misunderstanding. But this young man had taken approximately 3 hours to write out this very long email explaining exactly what happened. And he came to me and he wanted me to review it. So I looked at it and I said, why don't you just call your manager? He's like, no, they probably wouldn't want me to call them. And I was like, I knew that this manager was about 40. And I was like, no, I think that they probably would. And he's like, no. And so I finally got him to a point where I had convinced him that the best way to actually communicate with, because he couldn't meet that person in person, to actually get that person on the phone and explain, as upfront as possible what had occurred. It was interesting, the next day he called me and I said, how did it go? And he's like, well, I emailed them to set up a time to talk to him on the phone, but he was busy. So the challenge is that many of us are using technology to distance ourselves, but as millennials, we need to be coached at how to actually use communication skills to be able to continue to build those gaps, because one of the most powerful things is that millennials are the largest generation on the planet, but because of that, we can also kind of use that to our advantage and start to sway things and change things. And as a generation, we need to be challenged to really step up and be adults in these situations, because we're not going to be effective in the long run unless we can bridge that generation gap ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Gabrielle. My name is Marge, and I work in the accounting industry. And a lot of the accounting industry, there's no getting around it, is very routine, which is very hard to manage and engage millennials. What thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I do work with a lot of accounting firms, and I really work across industries. And what's interesting is that, yes, millennials don't want to do tasks that are static. Mm-hmm. But if you start with why, they're much more interested in it, right? Because many millennials are kind of used to being like the intern, right? Like many of us have had, those more static, not that exciting experiences while working. But if you help them understand why this particular project is important and how it actually engages the larger organization, they're going to be looking at that as an opportunity. So for example, my first job out of college was at a consulting firm. I was so excited, right? I had like my own office and like could close the door, and I sat in traffic, and it was like fun, right? And I remember getting into the office and it was not what I was expecting, right? Like I thought I was gonna be like consulting with big clients, and I thought I was gonna be on conference calls all day, and I had no idea what this actually meant. And I remember most of my time was in fact doing cold calls. It was incredibly routine. It was not what at all I was expecting at all. I was like, this is not Law and Order. Like, what in the world happened here, right? I'm cold calling people for a living. But it was interesting because I remember one day my manager brought me in and he said, hey, Gabrielle, I just want to take a moment. And he sat me down and he said, Gabrielle, I realized that this probably isn't the job you were expecting it to be. It wasn't that exciting. It's not that sexy. But you doing your job and serving your clients helps each of us do our jobs better. And by you doing an effective job, it helps the entire company do well. And I just want to say, I see you, I recognize you, and I appreciate you. I mean, that took maybe 15 seconds of his day, but you better believe I was incredibly motivated to continue to work harder and work better for that man. So when you're working in an industry that might be more static and not that exciting, kind of that startup disrupting kind of scene, keep in mind millennials want to know first that we're appreciated, that we're seen, but also too, we want to know the why. What's the purpose behind what we're doing?
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Jana Paniton, and I also am with an accounting firm. And my question to you is, what are your thoughts on reversed mentoring? How do you feel about that? Do you think that would be something worthwhile and successful?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jana. And this concept of reverse mentoring is an incredible opportunity. So for those of you who don't know what reverse mentoring is essentially engaging with those of another generation and learning from them. I said it, you can learn from someone who's younger than you, right? It's an opportunity to engage with them and say, I see you have a unique skill set You have a unique perspective. You have unique experience that I can actually learn from. So one of the top ways companies of all sizes can retain millennials is to provide a mentoring opportunity for them. Most companies have some sort of mentoring program in place. It just isn't working, right? Because it's kind of like Match.com. It's kind of like mentor A goes with mentor B, and you're supposed to somehow work. But we don't work that way. We're organic, and we want to develop relationships. And so providing opportunities for mentors to be able to be equipped with the information about how to build that bridge, and then helping millennials understand how to be mentored in a way that's more respectful is incredibly important. But finding a relationship with those that are younger than you, really helping to coach them to be able to understand this is why it's important to develop this relationship, and I can learn from you and you can contribute, and it's more than just, come hook up my wireless router, right? Like, you've got a unique perspective and I can really, appreciate your input on this is incredibly important. I say there's two phrases that are really powerful when it comes to engaging with millennials. The first is, I want your input on this, and the second is, I trust you. So by just saying those simple words, you're empowering them with this sense of confidence that someone outside of my own sphere sees me, trusts me, and wants me to do something, and you're instantly building better relationships.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you. Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for joining us this morning. I'm sure you all have been feverishly taking notes. I know I have, so thank you, Gabrielle. And before you sit down, Gabrielle wanted to offer one of you all her book. So I'm going to have you draw. See, that's the benefit of being here in the studio, right? If you were here in the studio, you could get a free book, but you're live streaming.
I'm not going to look. We have, is it Rachel Levine?
Awesome. Beautiful. So I'll hold on to it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Gabrielle, and thank you to all of you who joined us today here in the studio as well as through the live stream. Don't forget, Wednesday, April 22nd, a day in the life, so make sure that you take your pictures and tweet them out. Send them to my MC Media. You'll see information for those of you that are in the studio. You'll see information on these cards, but you may also send your pictures to Pix, that's P-I-X, at mymcmedia.org. So again, that's Wednesday, April 22nd. Also, be sure to stay tuned for our next Small Business University, which will feature Steve Dorfman, and he will be sharing with us, he's the CEO of Driven to Excel, he'll be sharing with us strategies to keep our clients engaged. So I thank you all for joining us here live in the studio, and thank you for joining us online. This concludes our event. And again, my name is Kelly Leonard. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.